I stopped calling my kids first about 3 years ago. Not because I stopped loving them. I stopped because a friend of mine, 78 years old, going through the exact same thing, said something that cracked the whole habit open for me. She said the parents who finally put the phone down aren't the broken ones. They're the ones who ran out of reasons to keep proving they still mattered. So today, 5 things I had to learn before I could let that phone sit quiet and still feel completely loved. The third one is the one that actually changed everything for me. Stay with me for that part. The first thing I had to learn was the hardest one to actually say out loud, even to myself. My children were never put on this earth to keep my life feeling full. I raised them so they could leave. That was the whole point of the job, even though nobody hands you that truth when you're rocking a 2-year-old to sleep at midnight, half out of your mind with love. Now, I know what some of you are already thinking. That sounds nice, but try telling that to the part of me that still needs to know if she's okay. I felt exactly that same resistance the first time I heard it, so let me actually walk you through what changed my mind. A large national study out of Cornell found that around 1 in 10 American adults has real distance from a parent or a child right now, and the people who choose that distance are overwhelmingly described, in the research, as calm and capable, not troubled. That number surprised me the first time I read it. It meant I wasn't nearly as alone in this as I'd assumed I was. There's a phrase I ran into a while back that finally gave a name to something I'd been circling for years without landing on it. It's called detachment with love. It didn't start out as advice for parents at all. It came from people learning how to love someone without needing to control them, fix them, or rescue them from every hard thing life was going to hand them anyway. Detachment with love doesn't mean I stopped caring. It means I stopped needing the daily proof of it. My daughter used to call my constant check-ins just checking in. I called it worrying out loud. Neither one of us ever said the real word for what it actually was, which was control, dressed up carefully enough that it could pass for love. I think about what I was actually chasing underneath all that calling. I wanted to know she was safe. I wanted proof I still mattered to her. But a phone call every other day was never going to settle either of those things for good. It was only ever going to ask the same question again and again, until answering it started to feel like a chore instead of a conversation. Here's the part I need you to really sit with, because it took me the longest to believe. Wanting less from someone is not the same thing as loving them less. I spent years thinking the two moved together. More love meant more need, meant more calling, meant more checking. It's the exact opposite. The less I needed her to prove she loved me, the more room there actually was for her to just love me, plainly, on her own time, without me standing in the doorway of it. So I'm not telling you to stop calling your kids. I'm telling you to notice the difference between reaching out because you want to hear their voice and reaching out because the silence in your own kitchen is making you anxious. One of those is connection. The other is just you quietly handing your worry to someone who already has a full one of their own to carry. The second thing came out of an actual fight, not a screaming one, just the kind that starts over something small and leaves both people a little stunned at how much it hurt going in. It happened over something almost embarrassingly small, which is exactly why it's worth telling you about, because that's usually how these things actually start in most families. Not with a slammed door, but with a key in a lock nobody thought twice about anymore. There's a woman I'll call Ruth, who used to drop by her daughter's place most weekends. No call ahead, no text. Just her own key turning in the lock the way it always had since the kids were small, and the door basically never closed. It had never once been a problem before. Not when her daughter was 22 and living on takeout. Not when the first baby came and Ruth practically moved in for a month. Then one Sunday afternoon, Ruth let herself in exactly the way she always had, and her daughter had friends over for lunch, and in front of all of them her daughter said, quiet but clear, "This is my house, and I need you to knock." Ruth went home that night and replayed just that one line on a loop. Not the embarrassment, not the friends sitting right there. Just my house, like she'd somehow become a visitor in a life she'd spent 30 years helping build, room by room. Here's what I wish someone had told Ruth that same night, and what I want to tell you now if a sentence like that has ever landed on you the same way. Her daughter wasn't saying she didn't belong to her anymore. She was saying the address had changed. The relationship didn't end at that door, only the terms did, and terms are allowed to change even when the love underneath them hasn't moved an inch. I had my own, quieter version of the same thing. No blow-up, just a slow unease I couldn't name for years. I'd let myself into my son's apartment with the spare key he'd given me back when he first moved out, thinking a mother with a key is simply a mother who's welcome. It never once crossed my mind that a key could turn into a demand the moment I used it without asking first. So I started doing something that felt strange and almost overly formal at first, like I was a guest checking into someone else's life, instead of the person who used to be the center of it. I text before I show up. I ask what time actually works for him. I say roughly how long I'll stay, and then, this is the part that took real discipline, I actually leave when I said I would. Now, some of you are probably thinking that sounds cold, that real family shouldn't need appointments. So here's something I want you to actually do, right now, not just think about. Picture the last time you called ahead before showing up somewhere that wasn't your own front door, a friend's house, a neighbor's, anywhere at all. You already do this everywhere else in your life. The one place you weren't doing it was the one place it mattered the most. A boundary like this isn't a wall, it's closer to a doorbell. It doesn't say stay out, it just says knock first, so the person on the other side gets to choose the moment they open the door, instead of bracing for whoever might already be standing in their kitchen when they walk in. It took real practice, and I mean that literally. The first text I sent asking permission felt clumsy in my hands, like I was performing manners with my own child. By the 10th time, it stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like something closer to respect, moving in both directions for the first time in years. And something happened on the other side of it that I genuinely didn't expect. My son started calling before he came over too, not because I ever asked him to, but because somewhere along the way, without either of us saying it out loud, we'd quietly agreed this was just how grown people who love each other treat one another's homes now. The third thing is the one I promised you back at the start, the one that changed the most for me, because it didn't cost me any distance or time at all. It only cost me a handful of sentences I finally had to stop saying out loud. When my kids do call now, I used to just open my mouth and let out whatever had been sitting in my chest since the last time we talked. I never thought of it as complaining. I thought of it as being honest with them. But I want to actually walk you through what those honest sentences sounded like landing on the other end of the line. What took you so long to call? That single sentence can undo the entire reason they picked up the phone in the first place. They dialed because some part of them wanted to hear your voice. The first thing they hear back instead is a scorecard. Are you doing okay for money? I used to think I was being helpful by asking. What actually landed on the other end was I don't trust you to be a functioning adult. Money finds its way when it needs to. What they wanted from that call wasn't a financial checkup, it was a mother who simply believed they had it handled. Have you been eating properly? This one felt so small I never noticed how it sounded until I actually stopped to think about who gets asked whether they've eaten. Toddlers get asked that. My 41-year-old son does not need me managing the contents of his refrigerator from 3 states away. When are you finally going to settle down? Their timeline was never mine to run in the first place. The second I turn a phone call into a deadline, I've taught them that picking up the phone comes with homework attached. Your cousin's kids call every single day. There is no faster way to make someone regret the call they just gave you than measuring it against a call they didn't give you. I said some version of this more than once without ever noticing the comparison sitting quietly inside it. And all it ever really told my kids was that whatever they'd just handed me wasn't quite enough. You have no idea how hard I worked raising you. I raised my children because that was the job I signed up for the day I decided to have them. The moment I hand them a bill for it, I've turned love into a debt they never once agreed to owe me. Here's what I try to say instead now. Thank you for calling. How have you been? Not fishing for one specific answer, just genuinely open to whatever they want to hand me that day. If something's ever hard, you know exactly where I am. And then I let that sentence sit there in the quiet without pushing behind it. And right before we hang up, one line. Just stay healthy. That's really all I need from you. A woman I know went through years of exactly this kind of thing with her own married daughter. Small comments neither of them thought were doing any real damage, until one day the distance between them had grown too wide to explain any other way. What she told me afterward has stayed with me ever since. She said the boundary itself was never actually the problem between them. It was always the words. Every single time, it came back down to the words. I think about that constantly now, right before I open my mouth. Not because I'm walking on eggshells around my own children, because I finally understand that the words I choose in the first 10 seconds of a phone call decide whether they hang up wanting to call me again or already quietly dreading the next one. The fourth thing I learned came from watching a friend of mine nearly run herself into the ground before she finally figured out what was actually happening to her. She has 3 grandchildren, and for 2 years she watched them almost every single weekday while her son and daughter-in-law worked their jobs. She loved those kids with absolutely everything in her. That was never in question. But she told me once, very quietly over coffee, that some mornings she'd hear their car pull into her driveway and feel something close to dread rise up in her chest, and then feel almost sick with guilt for feeling it at all. What she was actually carrying had very little to do with the children themselves. It was the fact that nobody had ever sat down and said, out loud, exactly how much of her life this arrangement was going to take. No schedule, no end date in sight, just an open-ended yes that kept quietly expanding until there wasn't much room left over for anything that belonged only to her. So she finally sat her son down and did something that felt almost embarrassingly businesslike for a grandmother to be doing. They agreed on specific days, a specific time she'd start, a specific time she was done. And she told him plainly, if any of this ever needs to change, we talk about it first. Nobody just assumes anymore. It felt cold to her the first time she actually said the words out loud. Grandmothers aren't supposed to negotiate their hours like it's a job posting. But here's what she noticed within about a month of doing it anyway. She wasn't dreading that driveway sound anymore. She actually looked forward to those specific afternoons, because they were finally hers to give freely, instead of hours quietly being taken from a life she'd never officially agreed to hand over. I think the exact same thing holds true even for people without grandchildren in the picture at all. Anytime I say yes to something without naming the actual size of that yes, how long, how often, what it's going to cost me in energy or time, I'm not really being generous. I'm just letting someone else quietly decide how much of me they get to have. A clear boundary isn't the opposite of love inside a family. If anything, it's what makes the love sustainable enough to still be standing 10 years from now. The people who burn out from giving too much are rarely the ones who learned how to say no. They're the ones who never quite figured out how to say how much. So now, whether it's babysitting or a favor, or even just how often I show up in someone's week uninvited, I try to name the size of it plainly before I ever agree. Not because I trust my children any less than I used to, because naming it out loud is the only way I get to keep showing up as someone who genuinely wants to be there, instead of someone who's just slowly running out of room to breathe. The fifth thing is the one nobody actually warned me about, because it doesn't show up right away. It shows up much later, in the quiet that's left over once everything else has finally settled down. For over 20 years, my days had a shape that wasn't really mine to choose. School pickups, dinners on a schedule, someone always needing something by a certain hour of the evening. And then, slowly, all of that just stopped needing me. Not because anything had gone wrong, because it had all worked exactly the way it was supposed to. That's the entire point of raising someone. But I wasn't ready for how loud an empty afternoon could actually get. I'd catch myself standing in my own kitchen around 4 o'clock, that old familiar worry rising up out of absolutely nowhere, my hand already halfway to the phone before I'd even consciously decided to pick it up. Nothing was wrong with my kids in that moment. Something felt unfinished in me, and calling them was the only tool I'd ever really learned for it. I want you to actually pause here for a second and think about your own version of 4 o'clock. What does the quiet sound like in your house, right around the time it gets the loudest? Just notice it. That's the whole exercise for now. We'll come back to what to do with it. A woman going through the exact same stretch of life once told me that the years she went back to part-time work, kept her hands genuinely busy, gave herself somewhere specific to be, those were the years the constant worrying about her kids finally started to quiet down on its own. Not because she loved them one bit less, because she'd finally given her own mind somewhere else worthwhile to go. So I started small, almost embarrassingly small. I picked one place, a little diner 2 blocks from my house, that became mine whenever the quiet got too loud to sit inside of. It's not that the pancakes are anything remarkable. It's that after enough visits, just walking through that door started calming me down before I'd even slid into the booth. I started a garden I'd never once had the time for before. Some mornings it's just me, a pair of clippers, and 45 unhurried minutes where my hands stay busy enough that my mind finally stops circling back to whether my daughter ever answered my last text. I picked one song that belongs only to me, the kind that, played loud enough on a genuinely hard day, reminds some older, steadier version of myself exactly how to stand back up. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. Go find your own. The point was never the song itself, it's simply having one. There were holidays I used to spend without either of my children in the room, and I used to add those up quietly, like evidence of everything I'd lost. I count them differently now. Not as proof they'd forgotten me, but as proof they were finally, entirely, living lives that didn't need my permission to be full. None of this was ever about filling the space my children used to occupy. It was about proving to myself that I still have a whole separate life in here, one that doesn't need their phone calls to feel like it actually counts for something. And here's the strange part I genuinely didn't see coming. The less I needed them to fill up my days, the more I actually started enjoying the days they did show up in. I wasn't waiting on them anymore. I was simply glad to see them, the same way you're glad to run into an old friend, not because you needed them to complete your afternoon, but because their company is just good, plainly, on its own terms. There's an old image I ran across a while back that says all of this better than I've managed to in the last 20 minutes. A parent is like a bow, a child is the arrow. All that bending backward I did for so many years, all that stretching, it was never meant to hold the arrow close to my chest. It was only ever meant to send it out, as far and as sure as it possibly could go. I used to think loving my children meant keeping them within arm's reach at all times. Now I think it means trusting the distance enough to let it stand there quietly, without flinching every time the phone stays silent for a day or two. So here's what I'd actually try, if you're anywhere close to where I was 3 years ago. Tonight, instead of picking up the phone, just send one short text. Nothing that needs an answer right away, just thinking of you, hope today was a good one. And the next time you're about to show up somewhere unannounced, try asking first instead. Not because you have to, just to see how it feels to let them open the door on their own time for once. And if you have grandchildren, or any place at all in your week where you keep saying yes without ever naming the actual size of it, try naming it, just once, out loud, to the person it involves. See if the yes feels any different once it's genuinely yours to give, instead of something quietly being taken from you. I won't pretend the quiet phone doesn't still catch me off guard some days, even now. But it's a different kind of quiet than it used to be. Not the kind that means something's wrong. The kind that means they're out there somewhere, living exactly the life I spent 30 years hoping they'd eventually get to have. If any part of this sounded like your own kitchen, your own phone, your own quiet Sunday afternoon, I'd genuinely love to hear it down in the comments. And if this helped even a little, I'll be right here again next week.